There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and to another episode of Zooming In, where I chat with bookish social media luminaries the world over about bookish and literary articles that we find online. And so I would like to welcome for her debut on this particular series, but she's been on my channel about 122 times, Sisilia from Singapore. Hello, Sisilia.
Hello, Shawn.
This is a topic that Sisilia suggested to me because it's one that's very significant to her, something she's been doing a lot of thinking and not just thinking about recently. And so we didn't find any particularly recent articles about this topic, but it also made me realize when the topic is the reader's lifestyle and literature, why do the articles need to be recent? They do not need to be recent. So Celia put forth one, and I found one that are both a few years old, but it doesn't matter. They're really interesting articles. And I suppose you're all sitting there wondering, what's the topic of this episode, Shawn the Book Maniac? Writing in book, annotating books. So it's a very interesting topic, and it's so interesting that we've decided to read two, and we're going to get into it in some detail. So this might be a bit of a longer episode. The two articles on annotation, writing in books that Cecilia and I've read, one is from Book Riot back in 2019, When Writing in Books is Okay by L.H. Johnson. And the one that Cecilia herself suggested, which is just excellent, is by the artist-writer Austin Kleon from his website, austincleon.com, from 2018, Reading with a Pencil. They're both fascinating, but the Austin Kleon one is just an absolute delight, many layered with links to here, there, and everywhere. So we're going to get into some of that as the discussion unfolds. Cecilia, set this up for us. Why did you suggest this? And why are we talking about writing in books?
Because I write in books. I don't have an issue with getting my books dirty with annotation, underlines, and some writings. But I also noticed that recently in Instagram or Bookstagram, some people are getting overboard with it. They do it like for aesthetic purpose, but it's not for the purpose of helping the person to read. Well, I might be wrong. Maybe that is really helping them to read actively. But I think it's getting ridiculous. I mean, for me to see underlines on every single lines for the whole page, for every different colors, and also highlights for every lines. So what is actually the purpose for that? What's the point of doing it?
It reminds me of how I was and most of my friends were as an undergrad university student when it was the dawn of the highlighter age. And most of us, we just highlighted everything.
Yeah. But did it actually help you?
No, absolutely not. It just felt like we were doing something.
Yeah.
So Cecilia has sent a picture that offends her in particular that we're going to put on the screen here so the viewers can see what she's talking about. So is this really becoming a trend? Aesthetic book annotating on Bookstagram? Really?
Yeah, and as you can see, they also use the tab stickers, what do you call it? Flags, yeah, the tabs with the different colors. They have a different purpose for each color. So maybe characters, maybe location, or a different color for nice quotes. So after the person finished reading, right, the book is full of tabs with multiple colors. So how do you actually find the things that is important to you?
Well, I guess I can see if there's a method. If each color represents something, then I wouldn't criticize that. But it sounds like you think for a lot of people, they just want to make something look pretty for their Instagram post.
That's what I think.
Well, we'll put that aside for now. So tell us about you as a book annotator.
I have my reading tools with me. So I have the book, I have a pencil, a ruler, and a stack of papers. Actually, I've been doing this for years. It's not something new. I like to underline these beautiful passages or something that capture my attention. There is a very important, like a certain paragraphs that really speaks to me. And I also write down my personal reaction to, what I read. And I like that. And because I'm very bad with remembering characters' names, I always have a piece of paper with me where I just write down which characters. And I mean, like if it's a French name or German name, that is even more difficult for me.
Sure. Or
Yeah.
if, as is often the case, not only in Indian literature, but that's where I first remember encountering it. I know it's also a thing, a challenge for readers who are not Russian of Russian literature. You have so many different names for the same person,
Yes.
pet names and nicknames and
Yes.
titles and
Surnames.
so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it gets very confusing. So my first question is, why don't you write that information, whether you do so in pen or pencil, right in the book? Why do you put it on a piece of paper?
Oh, it's easier for me to make a reference, right? I mean, like I have a separate piece of paper and I can just refer to it. Okay, who's this? I don't know, Fanya or something. Fanya, who's
Or
this Fanya?
Nevashenko.
Yeah. I like, for example, like in the photo that I sent to you, there is a photo of a piece of paper for Potluck by Émile
Right.
Zola. Yeah.
I'm going to put that on the
And
screen right now.
yeah. And that's interesting because Potluck is a story about the life of the residents in one apartment building. So there are 5 or 6 floors and there are different occupants for each floor. So I just jotted down who are on first floor, second floor, and third floor. So that is really make things easier for me.
I noticed that more and more books are actually putting a list of characters at the front of the book, and I appreciate that. And I wish I would get into the habit of doing that myself, just like you're saying.
Yeah. I actually do not use that. I don't.
You mean if it's supplied by the publisher?
Yes,
you mean?
Yes.
Why
Isn't
not?
that interesting? Because I find that they always give me spoilers. Because they describe, right? Yeah, describe certain characters like this is da da da. Then what happened to them? To the person. So I prefer to make my own list of characters.
That makes perfect sense to me. And I also think that, like a lot of note taking, it's the act of writing it down that puts it in our brain. And so you probably don't need to refer to the list as much because you've written it as you would if you hadn't written it.
That's true.
What other kinds of book annotations do you do? You mark favorite quotes and you make a characters list. Is there any other kind of?
I underline.
Do you write your reaction or opinion? Do you argue with the author in the margins?
Yes, I do all the above. I write whatever that came to mind. It's interesting. I read Daddy's Gone Hunting or something by Penelope Mortimer, and it's really good. It's full of my writing, actually. It can be like a silly reaction, like LOL, OMG.
Yes.
I think when I'm reading, I also trying to get ahead of the story, like what my suspicion about the ending about. I would write something like, "Oh, she's gonna die. She's gonna die," and then if the person really died, and then see. I guess correctly.
Yeah, it's like you planted the thought in the writer's mind. I am more likely to write in my nonfiction books than my fiction books. And I guess there is some kind of a taboo that a lot of readers have, and I have it to a certain degree, not wanting to besmirch, not wanting to write on the page, to leave it pristine the way it was printed. And so some people are horrified when they find out that I occasionally write in my books. But if I'm really getting into a work of nonfiction and I think it's going to be a reference book in the future, I will write in it. And so here is an example of a book that I read a year or two ago It's a work of Canadian Indigenous history, or Métis history, to be specific. The Northwest is Our Mother, the story of Louis Riel's people, the Métis Nation, by Jean Teillet. And this is a fascinating topic that I didn't know much about. And sadly, the book itself is not that good.
Okay.
So there were things that were, I thought, needlessly confusing. And so when I got to those points, I started to shout at the author.
Oh, okay.
So Louis Riel was the main Métis leader. And this is about the rebellion, the resistance that he mounted in early Canadian history. He did two of them, so I can't remember which one. The 1870s one in Manitoba or the 1885 one in what is now Saskatchewan. I'm not sure which, but where he was on any given day during the action is pretty important. And so I wrote in the margin of this
Okay.
page, Riel's whereabouts during this crucial period is not clear! Exclamation point. Like it needed to be clear, and it didn't seem like there wasn't enough historical record to make it clear. It just was vague writing.
Oh gosh, that's frustrating.
So there were quite a few like that. There was also a lot of things in this that I really enjoyed, and I hope that I underlined some of them too. But I did argue with this writer in the margins.
Do you use pencil or pen?
I don't like pencils, so I always use pen.
Okay. I don't use pen.
Because you're Asian.
Not really. There's a different reason for that. It's because pen bleeds through the page.
And I've never had that experience, but all my Japanese students, I'll probably edit out the probably saying it's because you're Asian. I don't want to be engaging. I don't want to engage in stereotypes, but all my Japanese students, they all brought pencils into the classroom, and they had erasers on them, and so the desks were always covered with little eraser things, and it's just like, yuck, use a pen.
I think that is really Asian,
I think it's an Asian thing.
It is.
So no, I don't think I have a pencil in my house.
Oh dear, I have like a pot full of pencils here in front of me.
Pot of pencils. But it also makes sense that if you want to give it away or trade it in at the used bookstore, could erase all that. But
that's the thing, once I make the book very personal by writing in it, I don't think I have the heart to give it away.
And I feel the same way. And that's why I only write in books that I think I'm going to keep, even if I'm going to keep them because I hated them so much.
Yes.
But if I think I just want to trade it in and get something that I might like better, I don't write in it at all.
Yes, I agree.
If it's a book that speaks to me deeply, and here's an example of a novel, one of my favorite novels of my whole life, from Australia. It's from the Wiradjuri Nation in what is now Australia, The Yield by Teillet Winch. It was my top read of, I forget which year, doesn't matter, a couple of years ago, and I loved it so much that I immediately started rereading it. And so I have 2 sets of notes. I hope that I used a different color ink or something so that I can distinguish which notes were from which reading. But it's also about a culture that I wasn't familiar with. So a lot of the notes I have, the marginalia, are about giving more information that as I was Google reading, or underlined passages that spoke to me deeply, or sometimes it's just a matter of putting an asterisk beside my favorite passage. But this is one that I did quite heavily annotate because it's a book that I will be like, I can't wait to reread it a second time. It's that important of a book for me. But it's also very rare for me to write in a book of fiction.
There's one interesting thing. This is what Litsy people did in the past. I'm not sure whether it's still going on, but I had a group of people with me. There are 4 of us. So each one of us pick a book and we send it to one another. So I send to A send it to B.
I remember there was some of those going around.
Yeah. So the rule for that is we annotate a book and we compare the annotation in the book. So
okay.
Yeah, so at the end, the owner of the book will receive a book full of annotation, complete with
and I believe those annotations were on sticky notes, were they not?
No.
Or were they were written on the page?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yes.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Here is
Yeah.
a book from my childhood. It was one of my favorite books when I was a kid. It's a British novel published in 1962. I'm not old enough to have read it in the 60s. I read it in the 70s, loved it, and I just found this copy when I was
That's nice.
on the farm. My grandparents gave me a library stamp, Library of Shawn
Oh,
Métis. I had my own library, and I belonged to something like that. It was called the Book Circle, and it was all within Western Canada. And so this book went around Western Canada, and everybody signed their name in
oh, that's
pencil,
sweet.
but
Yeah.
nobody wrote in it, thank God. But I'm looking forward to reading this.
Do
Well,
you use tabs?
I have rarely used tabs, but it's funny. I've just started using tabs because I recently had a buddy read where I was reading it during a week that was personally quite stressful. And when it came time to check in, I couldn't remember anything of what I'd read.
Yeah.
And so I thought, Shawn, you need to start using tabs. Usually I'm pretty good. I can check in on a buddy read without having underlined anything or made any notes. But I have started using tabs as an experiment,
Yeah.
and I'm enjoying that.
Yeah.
But reading these two articles makes me actually also think about the advantages of annotation. So I'd like to read something from the Cleon article.
Mm-hmm.
He gives so many samples of marginalia, including from Oliver Sacks, who I know is a writer that you were a big fan of, and I am too,
Yes.
but I've only read one book. And the British writer Patricia, I think she's British,
Mm-hmm.
writer Patricia Lockwood. I want to read this. There's a way of reading that is like writing. You feel in collaboration. You have a pen in your hand. You're going along in a way that's like half creating as you go. And you're also strip mining it for anything you can use. You're sifting for what could be gold. I love that.
Yeah.
Like
That's lovely.
co-creating. And I think that is how we all read anyway, but actually writing down our side of it
Mm.
as a dialogue in the margins, I think it's brilliant. I kind of want
Yes.
to try it again.
I am pro active reading.
Do you always write in your books or only sometimes? And if so, what is the
Always.
criteria? Always. Okay.
Always. I always have a pencil in hand. So this become a habit of mine. You know, when I read a book, I always have pencil in hand. And the ruler, I just insert in the book, just like, you know, my bookmark. So always like that.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
My problem is I do all of my reading in an electric recliner, so I'm reclined. And for me to write, I'm not in a position where I can write or print. I don't handwrite anything. I print everything, but it's messy. I should be reading at a desk, like you must read at a table if you're doing it, don't you?
Yes, at a desk.
Yeah.
That's my preference.
And, so it makes it a lot easier to write in books. So
Yes.
that's one thing. I also want to show this. This is an annotation by Mark Twain, or AKA Samuel Clemens, on the title page of Plutarch's Lives. And the information on the translator is translated from the Greek by John Dryden and others. And Twain has annotated a little caret and into rotten English, translated from the Greek into rotten English. So he wasn't a big fan of the translation.
Yeah. Yes. I know there are some people who do not like annotating in books and they prefer to keep a separate reading journal. Do you do that?
I have never done that. It sounds fascinating, and it would mean that I would get half as much reading done in a year as I do now.
Yeah.
So no. For me, as a booktuber, I do at least 50 weekly Friday reads a year. I maybe miss 2 in a year. And that's my reading journal. And so often, if I need to refresh my memory, how did I feel about that book that I read 3 years ago? And I just can remember a little bit. I'll go back and watch what I said at the time. So that's my.
Oh, that's really
my
cool,
journal.
actually.
Yeah.
Booktube
Yeah.
as your reading journal. Yeah.
That's right. But I'm still really tempted to do more annotation. There's somebody that he references more than once called Sam Anderson, and he's actually written books about marginalia. Editing Shawn here. Sam Anderson has not written books about marginalia, at least not that I can find, but he has written several articles.
Yes.
He sounds interesting. I'd like to read some more of his stuff. There's so many links on the Austin Kleon article that you could just get lost in it. It was just a rabbit hole of fascinating articles and references. So
Yes.
one of them is a Billy Collins poem, and I would like to read that. It's linked, and
Yes.
it is
Yes.
called Marginalia, and I'd like to read it in full. It's just a pretty short poem. Sometimes the notes are ferocious, skirmishes against the author, raging along the borders of every page in tiny black script. If I could just get my hands on you, Kierkegaard or Connor Cruise O'Brien, they seem to say, I would bolt the door and beat some logic into your head. Other comments are more offhand, dismissive. Nonsense. Please. Ha! That kind of thing. I remember once looking up from my reading, my thumb as a bookmark, trying to imagine what the person must look like who wrote, Don't be a ninny, alongside a paragraph in the life of Emily Dickinson. Students are more modest, needing to leave only their splayed footprints along the shore of the page. One scrawls metaphor next to a stanza of Eliot's. Another notes the presence of irony 50 times outside the paragraphs of a modest proposal. Or they are fans who cheer from the empty bleachers, hands cupped around their mouths. Absolutely, they shout to Duns Scotus and James Baldwin.
Beautiful.
Isn't that lovely?
Yeah, that's really good. So, I mean, that's what we do, right? Whenever we wrote LOL, OMG, like, oh my God. It can be anything. It's the fun of it.
I'd like to turn to the book right article because it talks about other things. One of which is dedications.
Yes.
So
I saw
the book
that.
right article is written by a librarian or an ex-librarian or something, and they say you should have the freedom to write anything you want in any book as long as it belongs to you.
Oh, yes,
And one of
I
the
agree.
things that's obviously you don't write, some people do, and it's terrible, write in library books or books they borrow from friends. But they talk about dedications. Do you have any dedication stories?
No. But I bought secondhand books and there's dedication in it. And it's pretty sad because that means that the book is very personal and yet it becomes kind of thrown away, finding its way in a secondhand bookstore.
Yes, that is a very understandable reaction. And I know that I forget I think the one writer is Trinidadian, V.S. Naipaul, and the American writer Paul Theroux. They were really close friends and then had a huge falling out. And it's one of the most famous, most poisonous literary feuds. And Paul Theroux, I believe, has written a book about it. Certainly he's written an essay about it. And he writes about finding all of his own books that he had personally inscribed for V.S. Naipaul in a used bookstore.
Oh,
Naipaul
no.
had just gotten rid of them.
Oh, that's so sad.
The other interesting thing that this book right article talks about is blackout poetry. Have you ever read any blackout poetry?
I've seen it, but I haven't really read it.
I haven't much either, but there is an Indigenous writer who lives uncomfortably in what is called Canada that has done some, and I've seen a few excerpts from it, and it looks fascinating. The book right article goes into some rather creative and things about what you can write in a book. That intrigued me. But the article by Austin Kleon was, you could just get lost in it. All the commentary and all the links. And
so many links.
Recommend people check that one out, especially.
I just want to comment that, the annotation by Oliver Sacks, that's really serious works. Yeah. Have you seen that? It's like so many things that he wrote there.
And the difference between what he did and what some superficial bookstagrammer influencers are doing is, how would you describe the difference?
The quality. It's a quality versus aesthetics.
And intellectual inquiry or dialoguing with the text as compared to using the text to get some attention and some likes online.
Yes.
Well, Cecilia, you almost have me convinced to start annotating more regularly and with more intellectual rigor. So thank you for this. And
Yeah.
thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you.